This morning we're going to talk about safety programs, the benefit of them, why you need them, what you should have in them. So by a show of hands, how many of you have a safety program in your workplace? Okay? Leave your hands up if you would. How many have you reviewed it in the last 5 years? If you haven't, put your hand down. How about the last year? How about the last 3 months? Okay. So we've only had a few people who've reviewed it recently. I asked that question because safety programs aren't a one and done. It's not something we can develop and then we don't ever have to worry about it again. It's a living, breathing document. It's something we need to continuously review. Now, of those people who raise their hands, raise your hands again if you have a safety program. Now leave them up if it's more than 2 pages long. A fair amount left their hands up. One of the things that I run into is I'll ask an employer, do you have a safety program? Oh yeah, we got a safety program. Cool. Can I see it? Well, it's more like a paragraph. And that paragraph is, we care about your safety and health. Don't do anything unsafe. If you get hurt, let us know. It's not necessarily a safety program. It's a safety paragraph. So there are some key elements we want to make sure as a safety person that you have in your health and safety program. Any governing body over safety says that these are the things that we need to make sure that we have in our health and safety program. We need to have management leadership. We need to have worker participation. We need to have hazard identification and assessment, prevention and control, training, program evaluation, improvement and enforcement. That's a whole lot of stuff. So let's break it down. First off, we talk about management leadership. That needs to be at the top. How many of you are owners or presidents or in the C-suite of your organization? By a show of hands. So you guys are the ones that actually have to show this management leadership commitment. First part of your safety program needs to be that leadership, management, supervision is committed to safety and health. Now, that all looks well and good, but we have to walk the talk. I have an insured that I work with on a regular basis. They're a great company. They make car shredders. So you drop a car in the top, soda can-sized pieces come out the bottom. They deal with some heavy-duty stuff. Problem is that the owner and the CEO, when they go out on the plant floor, they're wearing their penny loafers. Now, how can they get onto an employee for doing something unsafe when they're not following the same rules? Because their standard dress for walking out in that plant, in that operating area, steel-toe boots, safety glasses, hearing protection, high-vis clothing. But yet the owner will walk out in his penny loafers and his regular bifocals. Nothing else. What is that telling your employees? It tells them, well, if they can do it, I can do it too. You have to walk that talk. You have to lead by example. So it has to be spelled out. The commitment has to be spelled out in your program. You need to communicate that to your workers, and you also need to show it. You need to exhibit it. Sorry. You also need to encourage worker participation in this. As the employer, the supervisor, the HR person, the safety professional, whatever your job title is, we need to encourage the workers to be part of this safety program. We need to encourage them to be part of developing it or revising it or reviewing it. How many of you work on your operating floor every day or on your job site every day? How many of you are actually on site getting your hands dirty? Okay. For those of you who didn't raise your hand, you've either forgotten or you don't know the hazards that your workers face every day. They do. So we can sit up here and we can write a safety program, but are we addressing all the hazards that are involved in that workspace? The only way to be sure is to include that worker in that. Hey, Joe, what do you think? What are the hazards that you're worried about? Include them in that conversation. When you do that, they take more ownership of it too, because they helped with it. So we have to encourage their participation. We definitely need to praise and reward near miss reporting or safety and health concern reporting. One of the biggest barriers, one of the biggest drawbacks that you get is when an employee walks up and says, hey, this is a hazard. I almost got my finger cut off. We need to get this fixed. And a supervisor tells them, just be more careful next time. What did you just do? Now you have deterred that employee from ever reporting another near miss again or a safety and health concern. That my supervisor doesn't care, so why should I report it? So we have to actually praise that and say, thank you for bringing this to our attention. We'll do what we can to take care of it. Even just acknowledging it. Now that worker feels heard. And once you make that worker feel heard, they're more apt to report another one and another one. What we find is it takes 600 near misses to create one major catastrophic injury. Somewhere in that 600, okay? So it could be after the first 10 or it could be after the first 300. We don't know. But why would you discourage near miss reporting or safety and health concerns? Why would you discourage that? You need that worker to bring this stuff to you because, again, for those of you that didn't raise your hand, that aren't out on the floor every day, you don't know the hazards that these people are facing. So you rely on them to report this stuff to you. And then you need to figure out what you need to do to mitigate that hazard. The next element is education. How many of you have a training program for your employees? Okay? What does it consist of? Does it consist of sitting in a classroom and you droning on about a document that you have and then they sign the back of it? Or is it, do we walk up and hand the safety Bible and say, here, read this and sign the back page? I can tell you exactly what happens if you do that. Before I got into this, I was a bricklayer. I worked for several different companies. I traveled the country doing fire brick work. Every single company I worked for had a safety and health program. I didn't care about that safety and health program. I wanted to get to work. So what did I do? I flipped to the back page and I sign it, date it, hand it back to HR. That's just what I did. That's what 90% of your employees do. So when I took this position with UBIC, they handed me their employee manual. I did the same thing. Flipped to the back page, signed off on it, dated it, gave it back to HR. Fast forward about a year later, I had a company call me. They wanted me to consult on something completely unrelated to safety. It was on what I used to do in my previous life. But they wanted approval from my boss that I was okay to do it, that I wasn't under a no-compete or anything like that. So, okay. So I sent an email to my boss. Hey, I need approval for this. Did you read page 18 of the employee manual? I said, no. He says, well, maybe you ought to go back because there's a moonlighting clause in there. What's that? We'll go back and read the manual. You signed it, but you didn't read it. So I went back and read it and come to find out I wasn't supposed to be doing any of that I had been doing for the last year on the weekends. So they didn't educate me properly. I just flipped to the back and signed the back page. 90% of your employees are going to do the same thing. The problem is that we need to educate them more. Too many times we sit people in a classroom and we make them go through a PowerPoint presentation. And we believe that they're adequately trained. We sit people in classrooms like this. As an OSHA trainer, when I teach general industry and construction classes, I notice that usually 25% of my audience has a hard time staying awake. Why? Because they're used to being up and moving around and doing things. You put them in a comfy, controlled room, in a seat, guess what? They're gonna drift off. It doesn't matter how entertaining I am. They're going to drift off. So we have to make sure that we walk that balance of training in the classroom, but also hands-on training, whether it be on the job or out on the plant floor or whatever that may be. The education piece of it is the biggest piece of it. That document is just a document. That paperwork is just paperwork. We actually have to train them on it, but we also have to make sure that they understand it. Now, we can give a test. We need to make sure that we're training. That is the biggest piece that I see employers miss on time and time again, is the training piece of it. One of the biggest training parts that I think are important for every employer to get and to give to their employees is injury reporting training. Because one of the things that we find as an insurance company is that the longer someone waits to report a claim, the worse it gets. Our worst one, we had an employee who he felt a pop in his arm. Now, he was a big man. He was a bodybuilder on his spare time, right? So he had to turn sideways to walk through most doors. He felt a pop in his arm and just thought, oh, it was a pop, and kept working. Well, it wasn't just a pop. He had actually severed his bicep tendon. It popped. Problem was that he continued to work for 3 days. And then finally, after the third day, the pain was so bad, he thought, okay, I got to go to the doctor. Problem was that tendon had retracted back so far, we had to do 3 surgeries to drag it back down. For those of you who have a weak stomach, I apologize. But they had to cut him open, basically take a piece of stainless steel piano wire, stretch that tendon down, and then sew him back up. Go back in 5 weeks later, do the same thing. 3 surgeries. All because he didn't report it on time. Now, I asked him whenever we were talking, because I went out and did a training for him a little bit later on, I said, why didn't you report that? Well, I really didn't know what I was supposed to do, and so I just kept working with it until I couldn't work no more. Well, that's where, as an employer, they failed, because you need to express to your employees, anytime you have an injury, no matter how minor it may seem, it needs to be reported. Because if you don't report it, then we can't get you the right treatment. Had that man reported that as soon as it happened, it would have been 1 surgery, it would have been 1 and done. But instead, he had to go through 3. So you need to educate your employees on your health and safety program, but also on how to report injuries. It's critical, because the longer you wait, the worse it gets. Now, Sarah Eifert, where's Sarah? Oh, she must have walked out. She's probably out there. So Sarah and I work together on some more severe claims that we have. And with Sarah, one of the things that we found was that if they waited more than 5 days, that claim got horrendous. So we need to get it reported. We need to get it reported right away. And you have to educate your employees on that. Unfortunately, with our employees, they don't learn the first time. They're kind of like kids. Sometimes it takes 2 or 3 times for them to get it. So it's something that needs to be addressed time and time again. You need to continually address it with them. Because if you don't, they're going to forget it. And then you're going to wind up with the same thing that we had. Oh, well, I thought it was bad, but I just waited. But education is key for any safety and health program. That paperwork that they have or that you have is just a document. The education piece of it is what actually prevents the injuries and illnesses. Ask for worker input. So ask your employees, hey, what other stuff do we have that you're concerned about? What keeps you up at night? What are you worried about getting hurt by? Ask them for their input. And remove communication barriers. I have seen employers who have suggestion boxes. I walked into one facility and they had a suggestion box. Do you have a safety and health concern? Please put it here. They had a box similar to that. It had about that much dust on it. Nobody used it. Because if I feel as though you don't want to actually hear me tell you about my safety and health concerns, why am I going to write it on a piece of paper and drop it in the box? It needs to be a conversation that you have with employees. What are your concerns? What can we do to address them? And it needs to be a regular conversation, not just a once a year or a one-time conversation. You also need to be able to learn from your history. How many of you have had workers' comp claims in your organization? Everybody's hand should go up. Everybody's had a claim eventually. You have to learn from your history. So we have our safety and health program, and we think it's all great and good, but then all of a sudden we wind up with an injury. And we go, ooh, we don't have anything on our program about that. Well, that's where you learn from your history and you fix that problem. Do an objective claim review to learn the root cause. Don't look to point fingers. Okay, what did he do to screw up? What did he do? I hear that a lot when they're doing incident investigations. Well, he did this. Well, he did that. Well, what was the situation surrounding what he did? Because there was some environmental things going on too that caused this injury. Once the root cause is established, you need to review the actions that you should take. Back in December, we had a 4-finger amputation. Employee was trying to change the feed on a shear machine. He had his hand, he's arm deep in the machine, up to here. Well, he reaches up to hit the start feed button because he wants to start the feed on the metal to get it fed into the machine. Well, the start feed and the start shear button were literally right next to each other. Well, he's stretched out like this, he hits a button, he has the guard off, and he sees the shear start to cycle, so he pulls his hand out, but not before he catches all 4 fingers. When the loss control rep went and visited with him and said, okay, how did this happen? Well, he should have known better. He had his arm in there, and he's been trained on this. And okay, but what were the other cultural issues going on there? Number one, the employee thought it was okay to operate a piece of equipment after he had removed the guard. That's a root cause, right? Had we had that and we eliminated that, and in your organization, your employees know that they're not allowed to operate a piece of equipment without the guards on, that injury would have happened. We can all agree on that, right? Because had he locked it out, that machine wouldn't have cycled. So it's not, when we do a claim review, we're looking for the environmental issues that we can fix. We're not looking to point fingers, because pointing fingers doesn't do anything other than pit your employees against you. So be objective with these, is all I'm saying. And when you're reviewing, revising, or developing your safety program, first thing you want to do is hazard prevention. How can we prevent the hazard? In the safety world, we're really good at making ourselves sound super smart. So we have what's called the hierarchy of controls, okay? And we have engineering, administrative, and work practices and PPE. That sounds all well and fancy, right? What it means is, can we get rid of the hazard? If we can't get rid of it, can we substitute anything for it? And if we can't do that, what do we need to do to protect our workers? It's a whole lot more simple, but then we don't sound as smart. So that's why we still use the hierarchy of controls. But our first step is hazard prevention. Unfortunately, though, you don't know what you don't know. As an employer, as a manager, as a supervisor, you're not on that plant floor every day. You're not on that job site every day. You're not on the road every day. You don't know the hazards that they're facing. So ask, hey, employee, what hazards do we have that are still uncontrolled? What issues do you see out there? And can we eliminate it? If you can eliminate it, that's the best way to do it. But apply Murphy's Law to everything that gets brought up. Murphy he was a sadist, let's just face it. But with Murphy's Law, if we apply it to everything we do, then we can eliminate a lot of the hazards that cause needless injuries. We can agree on that, right? Sometimes, though, we can't prevent the hazard. There are things that we just can't do. If you're a framer, you're building a house, you're sheeting the roof, there's no way that we can eliminate that height exposure. You're going to have to be on the roof to put plywood on the roof, right? So then we talk about hazard reduction, because sometimes that's our only choice. ALARP is a real word in our world. It means as low as reasonably possible. So we're going to take that framing carpenter. He's up on the roof. We can't get him not to be on that roof. He has to sheet it. So what do we do to reduce that hazard? Put him in a harness and tie him off, right? Now we still have the hazard. He can still fall, but we've reduced the potential for injury. So sometimes that's all we can do, is reduce it. But you should document why prevention is not feasible. So in your safety program, it should say, these are the things that we've done to reduce the hazard. These are the things that we've done to eliminate the hazard. It should be spelled out so that everybody understands. There should be enforcement in your safety program. How many of you have a disciplinary action plan? Okay? For those of you that don't, you should. Because how can we enforce our safety and health program? And if we're not enforcing it, it's just as bad as not training on it. It's just as good as the paper it's written on then, because it has no teeth. employees will know that it doesn't matter whether or not I wear my safety glasses. They're not going to say anything about it. I can't tell you how many times I've walked through a facility, glasses are sitting up here. People's foreheads are safe. Their eyeballs aren't. But there's no enforcement. And I'm walking through with the owner of the company, and he's not saying a word. I'm like, well, why aren't we saying anything? We have to enforce it. It has to be enforced across the board. It needs to be documented, and the punishment should fit the crime. So if you have somebody who's wearing safety glasses, not wearing safety glasses properly, okay, hey, put your safety glasses on. Don't make me tell you again. But if you have somebody who's shoulder deep in a machine that's not properly locked out, you probably need to take a little bit more severe steps as far as discipline goes, right? So the punishment needs to fit the crime. And it should be focused on proactive measures. It should be focused on keeping people in compliance. Because if we have them in compliance with our safety and health program, we're going to have less injuries. If that guy isn't shoulder deep in a piece of equipment, he's not going to have an amputation. So we don't have to worry about it now. So we should be focused on compliance and on proactive measures. OSHA has some required programs that they say you're supposed to have in writing. How many of you have a fall hazard in your workplace? By a show of hands. Who knows what a fall hazard is, according to OSHA? Okay, so for those of you who don't know, for general industry, it's a fall 4 feet or greater. Now, that's kind of a generalist broad statement, but that's all we're going to go with for now. If you're exposed to a fall of 4 foot or higher, OSHA says that in general industry, you have to have a fall protection program. In construction, it's 6 feet or higher. And again, there's some other stuff there, but we're just going to go with the 6 foot rule. OSHA says you have to have a fall protection program. In construction, it doesn't have to be documented, but in general industry, it does. And you're supposed to have it spelled out in black and white. Confined space. How many of you have confined spaces in your workplace? Do you have a confined space program? When's the last time it was reviewed? We have to look at all these things. Respiratory. That's another one that people miss. How many of you have respirators in your workforce? People wear them. How many of you have a respiratory protection program? Who sends their people to go get fit tested and medically evaluated? Yeah. Some of you, but it's a commonly missed aspect. I see people all the time, yeah, we put them in respirators. Okay, well, where's your respiratory protection program? A what? When's the last time you did a physical evaluation on them or did a medical questionnaire? A what? Okay. And my favorite is when I walk in and there's a painter in a paint booth. He's wearing a full-face respirator and he's got a bigger beard than mine. Well, we're not in compliance with the respiratory standard. So these are all things that OSHA says we have to have. They require us to have programs for all this stuff. If that's not in your safety and health program, then you're not in compliance with OSHA. Now, some of this stuff, indoor air quality, for instance, that was the industrial hygienist. They wanted to get their grubby little fingers in there. So they threw that one in there as a standard that we have to comply with. Indoor air quality, is that going to cause an injury? Maybe, maybe not. But some of this other stuff, forklifts, process safety management, radiation, that's all some serious stuff that you need to make sure that you have addressed. So what are the benefits of it? Because that's really what we're here to find out. Sam, why do I have this Bible of safety? Why do I have all this documentation? What is the benefit to me as an employer or a supervisor to go through all this crap, right? That's really what you're concerned about. So number one is potential for reduced insurance costs, and we'll get into that. We have a reduced injury potential. It provides a clear communication of your expectations, provides some retribution for failure to comply, and it gives you an affirmative defense for employee misconduct. So those are the key benefits. There's some other ones, but those are the key ones that I want to hit on. Number one is reduced insurance rates, or potential for reduced insurance rates. How many of you are familiar with your EMOD, your experience modification rate? We know what it is? Okay, we know how it works, so I don't have to go into great detail. If you have an injury and illness prevention program or a safety and health program, and an underwriter knows about it, they can actually apply schedule credits to your policy. I'm not saying they have to, but they can. There is the potential for them to do it if you make your carrier aware. Hey, we have a safety and health program. They have a section that they can add credits for that if they deem fit. Reduced injury rates, which translates to a reduced mod, which translates to reduced premiums. If we address or eliminate certain hazards, it creates a more favorable loss control report. How many of you have met a loss control rep? Had a loss control rep walk through your facility? I am so sorry. Most people hate us. But when we do the walkthrough, we're writing a report. Flint's in the room somewhere, Walton. So Flint, he's a colleague with MEM. When Flint does a walkthrough, he's noting all the hazards that he sees. He's also asking questions like, well, do you have a safety program? Do you have a training program? When's the last time you went over this? It makes a more favorable loss control report if we have all the paperwork and all the documentation that goes along with it. We're nerds. We like paperwork. We like facts. We like figures. If you give us all that stuff, it makes us happy. So having that stuff makes a good loss control report. What that does is that, in turn, makes the underwriter happy because the underwriter sees, oh, it was a favorable loss control survey. Guess what? They can add credits for that. I'm not saying they will. I'm not saying they have to, but they have the ability to. So it's important for you to understand that doing this, it has some benefits to it, some monetary benefits. A safe driving program, depending on your insurance carrier for your auto insurance, sometimes they give you a discount. I actually have an insured who has me come out and do defensive driving training once a year for their employees. They do it, number one, because they want to have their employees do it, but number two, their employees have told them that they get a reduction on their own personal auto insurance because they went through a defensive driving course. So there's some benefits there as well. So we want to reduce injury rates. Our goal in safety is obviously to send everybody home the same way they came in, right? That's my goal. If we can provide clear communication to employees, because I get so many times where an employee says, I didn't know. Well, if they didn't know what they were supposed to be doing and they wind up getting injured, whose fault is that? We'll go back to that whole environmental concern. What environment did they get injured in? So if we have clear communication and it provides a documented guideline for them, then they don't really have an excuse not to follow the rules. I had a food producer who they hired out of a place called the International Institute. They had 14 different languages working in their operation. And this wasn't the easy stuff like Spanish and French and German. This was stuff like Laotian and Croatian and Burmese and some really off-the-wall stuff, right? Their lockout-tagout program was in English and Spanish. They had 2 Spanish-speaking workers. That, as far as their workers on the floor went, they had 0 English-speaking workers. Nobody was even bilingual. So we had an employee stick his hand in a machine because he was trying to fix something. That's a food producer. They have grinders. I won't bore you with the details, but let's just say he lost a couple digits. Now, when we went back and we're like, okay, was he trained? Well, yeah, he was trained. Well, we had to have a translator speak to him whenever we were doing the claim. How did you train him? Well, we had our guy over here training. Well, the guy over here, their trainer was Bosnian. He spoke 0 English. He also spoke 0 Vietnamese, which is what the guy who amputated his fingers was. So it was the Tower of Babel. So we have no communication, no clear communication there. And we have an injury as a result of it. It has to be clear, it has to be documented, and it needs to be in the language of your workforce. That's actually an OSHA requirement. OSHA says that your documented safety program has to be in the native tongue of your employees. So for those of you who have people who don't speak English, you need to make sure that your documents are also in their language too. But with it providing a clear-cut communication, it gives also step-by-step instructions for employees, for new employees, and you can use it as a new employee training template. So you have 3 or 4 different people who do your new employee training or new employee orientation, okay? Everybody trains differently. My loss control rep in Las Vegas trains differently than my one in Salt Lake City. My one in Salt Lake City trains differently than I do. So we all train different. If we all use the same template, though, we're all providing the similar information. So having that documented health and safety program, it gives your trainers a step-by-step guide, something to follow. Here's the big kicker. It provides an affirmative defense for OSHA. If you have an employee or a documented health and safety program, you've trained your employees on it, you have documentation of that, then let's say that you discussed it at one of your safety meetings, and you have documentation of that. And you can also show that you enforce your safety and health program by way of disciplinary procedures that are documented in employee files. OSHA shows up on your job. You have an employee, that same employee is shoulder deep in that piece of equipment. It's not locked out and tagged out. OSHA walks up and says, whoa, we can't be doing that. And they want to issue a citation for failure to lock out, tag out. If you can take all that paperwork and take it to an informal conference and sit down and say, here's our lockout, tag out program. Here's the date that he was initially trained. Here's the date that we went over that training again. And here's where we enforce our lockout, tag out policy. We've already written up 3 employees so far this year for it. Now it's employee misconduct. So that's an affirmative defense for OSHA. The best example I can give, I had an employer up in St. Joseph. He had an employee who came back after lunch, got into a boom lift. The guy had his harness on, had his lanyards. They were clipped to him, and he takes the basket up. He's not tied off. He's got everything on. He just didn't clip off to the basket. Well, OSHA was sitting across the street. They see the guy boom up. They take a couple pictures. They get out. They walk on site, introduce themselves to the employer, explain to them why they're there, basically say, I'm recommending that we issue a citation for lack of fall protection. Well, that is a willful citation more often than not. Anybody know how much a willful citation from OSHA is? How much? 100 and what? $136,000 this year. So he was going to get cited because that employee forgot to clip off. So the employer calls me and he's freaking out. Sam, they're gonna issue a citation for lack of fall protection. Oh, what am I gonna do? I said, okay, well, we've already done the fall protection training for you. You did your OSHA 10. You guys have probably talked about it in one of your safety meetings so far this year. Can you show enforcement of your fall protection program? Well, yeah, I wrote another guy up for not being tied off in the basket. Perfect. Request an informal conference. He requested an informal conference, goes and sits down with the assistant area director, gives him all of his training documentation, all of his policies and procedures. The area director said, that's employee misconduct. Now he wasn't subject to that citation. So it works. If you have all the paperwork. If you only have half the paperwork, it's not going to work. You have to make sure that you have the program, you have the training, and you have the enforcement. If we can prove that we have those things, then you're good. The discipline part, I hammer on a lot because I get, what am I supposed to do, Sam? How am I supposed to enforce this? I can't find workers as it is. What, do you want me to fire half my workforce because they won't wear my safety glasses? Well, no, I don't want you to fire half your workforce, but we have to show discipline. You have to show that it's enforced, and it has to be fair and equitable across the board. So you can't not write this employee up, who's the CEO's stepson, but then write this employee up for the same violation. Has to be fair across the board. You have to show discipline, though. It provides the teeth. And again, I go back to employees are like kids. Okay? I have a 5 and a 7-year-old daughter. They're wonderful little girls 80% of the time. The other 20% of the time, they take after their mother. But that 20% of the time, when they're acting a fool, and you wind up smacking one of them, that's all it needs to be, is just a swat across the butt. One swat. Both of them toe the line for the next 36 hours. It's amazing how that works. It even makes the neighbor kids behave, which I think is hilarious. Neighbor kids will be over there and they'll be like, did Hadley get in trouble while Emma was there? I'm like, yeah. Man, she's been good as gold the last day and a half. Well, she didn't want to get a SWAT either. But if we do that with our employees and we show that we have the teeth to enforce it, everybody's going to toe the line. So all it takes is once or twice for them to get the picture that you're serious about this. But you have to do it, and it needs to be documented. So when we talk about ownership of a safety program, we have employers, we have supervision, and then we have employees. It needs to be from the top down. So from the top, we have to have the employers themselves, they have to talk the talk and they have to walk the walk. I talk about my fabrication shop where they walk out in penny loafers. That employer has had more issues with compliance with their PPE than any other employer that I deal with on that regular of a basis. Their plant manager was riding around literally on the forklift in Crocs. And he's hauling around, he's driving one of those big Taylors. He's hauling around some 1-inch plate steel in Crocs. I'm doing the walkthrough and we stop and look, I get my phone out, I snap a picture, text it to Paul, and I'm like, Paul, we need to talk. Well, he said that his feet hurt. Well, they're going to hurt really bad if something falls on them Crocs. So management has to take ownership. They have to walk the walk. If you don't, you're setting an unwritten precedent for your employees. Well, if they don't have to, I don't either. And that culture that we talk about, it starts with the C-suite. It starts with ownership. It starts with upper management, because employees are going to do what you do, right? Again, I go back to my daughters. They are sponges. They absorb things. And then when they say things, I go, ooh, that was me. I shouldn't. I need to be more careful. Employees are the same way. They're going to do what you do. You have to make sure that you're setting the precedent for it. Because if you don't, then you're going to wind up fighting that fight time after time with your employees. As far as management goes, management, unfortunately, they're the enforcers. They're the bridge between the C-suite and ownership and the frontline employees. They're the ones that get the bad rap because they're the ones that have to do all the heavy lifting with the safety and health program. They're the one that has to enforce it. Say, hey, I see you're not wearing your safety glasses. This is the second time I've told you so far this month. You're getting written up. Well, that employee's not going to be mad at the CFO for that. He's going to be mad at that middle manager for that. But they're the ones that have to do it because that CFO isn't on the floor every day. The supervisor is. That manager is. But they also have to buy into it. That plant manager that was wearing Crocs, he was the toxic ingredient in that fabrication shop. Because he's wearing Crocs, driving around on a Taylor, the rest of the employees thought that they could get away with stuff too. He's driving around on a Taylor. I had an employee who was here, and he had his AirPods in listening to music, running a grinder. Well, he has no hearing protection. He's got, you guys know the Apple AirPods. They provide no noise reduction rating whatsoever. And he's in there grinding on a big chunk of steel. Well, I can't yell at him when his boss is wearing Crocs. It's kind of hard to do that, right? So that manager has to buy into it too. Because if they're not buying into it, then the employees are going to be even harder to break down. So we have to get them to buy into it. They have to be willing to enforce it. And the message has to be clear from the top down through management. We care about your safety and health. That's our number one priority. Because if they don't buy it, the employees aren't going to buy it. And the employees are the ones that we really need to buy it. When it comes to enforcement, and I say this twice, which means I really, really mean it. Your managers are your enforcers. It has to apply equally. If it doesn't apply equally, number one, we don't have an affirmative defense against OSHA. Number two, we don't have a benefit reduction for the work comp injury when it does happen. It needs to be documented, and it needs to follow the company's disciplinary guidelines. Now, I bring up the benefit reduction, and I didn't cover that, and my apologies. For those of you who don't know, the state of Missouri allows for what they call a safety violation reduction. If you have an employee who is injured due to not following a company safety policy, and you can prove that they were trained, that you enforce it, then the insurance company can actually reduce their lost time and settlement benefits up to half in the state of Missouri. Now, every state has their own law. Illinois, they don't allow for any of that, so stay out of Illinois. But that's what Missouri's law is. Tennessee has a different law. Arkansas has a different law. But if we can provide your documentation, we can provide your enforcement, well, now we can reduce that claim cost. And it's kind of that employee skin in the game. Now, the important part for you guys to understand is that's critical for you to share with your employees now. Because guess what? If I'm a worker making $15 an hour, and at the next safety meeting I come in and I sit down, and you tell me that, hey, if you get injured and you're not wearing your safety glasses, and we have the rule in place and we've talked about it, and we can show enforcement, they're going to take away half of your money. As an employee making $15 an hour, and then I start doing the math in my head, okay, work comp pays 85%, they're going to take half of that away, that's 42.5% of my salary. I'm awesome at easy math, so we'll say I'm making $10 an hour. $4.25 an hour. That's what I'm going to make sitting at home. It's $4.25 an hour. When you break it down and you explain it to your employees that way, and I do this all the time, I see this. Can you pay your bills on $4.25 an hour or 42.5% of your salary? And my whole audience goes, guess what? Wear your safety glasses. Then they actually start to get it because there's some skin in the game for them. Because the biggest thing that I see employers or trainers miss is the what's in it for me. If I start talking about taking money out of your pocket, you're going to start paying attention, right? So explain that to them ahead of time. That's going to help with your enforcement. And then you give them the reminder when you walk by and you see they're not wearing their glasses, hey, do you only want to make 42.5% of what you're making right now? No. Put your glasses on your eyes. It helps. It's that extra little twist. So when you have our safety and health program that we're talking about, the employees' roles need to be clearly defined. You need to explain to them what their role is, what their responsibilities are, okay? Explaining to them that their responsibility is to follow the rules that are in this policy, and explaining to them that it's a legally binding document when they sign it. Because the first thing that a claims adjuster is going to ask when you have that injury, do you have a policy against us? Well, yes, we do. Okay, well, please send it over with their signature page. Explain that to your employees and explain what their role is. Documented training should be provided and a compliance page should be signed. Here's the thing. I sat through a presentation 3 weeks ago, up in St. Louis at the ASSP luncheon, and it was talking about the affirmative defense for OSHA and all that. And it was an attorney, and she was saying, basically, her biggest wins were because they had the paperwork. Because if it's not on paper, according to OSHA, it didn't happen. You can say, yes, we have a safety and health program. Yes, we have a lockout tagout program. We have a seatbelt policy. Whatever that policy is, yes, we have it. Well, how did the employee know that you had it? Well, we went over it. If you don't have a signature page and a date, it didn't happen. It's just one of those pieces of paper that's out there floating. So you need to have a compliance page. And then when you do your training, it needs to be job specific on the policies that you have, on near miss reporting and on injury reporting, and then the disciplinary procedures. I hear employers complain about the onboarding process and how expensive it is and how much time it takes. It does take time. But you have to be willing to do that, because if you're not willing to do that, then it's going to cost you more money in the long run. Anybody ever get on the OSHA small business calculator? See, I told you, safety guys are geeks. Flint's back there nodding his head. The OSHA small business injury calculator basically tells you what an injury is going to cost you, all in all, right? So if we have a $10,000 injury, and this is rough math, I don't know exactly off the top of my head, $10,000 knee injury, that $10,000 knee injury is actually going to wind up costing you something like $110,000 when it's all said and done, due to lost time, production, rehire, training, all that stuff. So we want to get the training right the first time so we don't have the injury. But you guys have to document it, and we have to make sure that we're covering everything that we should be. So when we talk about best practices, now we know what we're supposed to have in a safety program, right? Everybody knows the things that they should have. And if you don't know, ask somebody. If you have a work comp insurance carrier, guess what? They have a loss control guy. They have a guy that does my job. Call him. Make him go to work. Because a lot of times they just sit at home anyways. So call them. Have them come out. Have them help you. That's their job. That's what they get paid for. Ask them, hey, we have this, this, and this. Is this okay? Ask those questions if you're unsure. But the best practices that we talk about in the safety world, number one is ANSI Z10. Does anybody in here have a Z10 program? Anybody ever heard of it? Okay, it's not a random star out in the galaxy. It really is a safety thing. So, ANSI Z10 talks about total worker protection. It's a best-in-class policy. It has a management of change section that you have to go through, and it talks about prevention through design. Prevention through design is something, if you're building on, if you're adding on to your place of employment, you're adding more equipment. We talk about safety and health before you even break ground. What are the things that we're going to do to make sure that we're going to eliminate these hazards? So, for instance, Amazon. One of their first new plants that they built when they really started taking off, Amazon sat down with their safety and health team and said, okay, we don't want to have any forklift injuries. How are we going to prevent this? What did they do? They put in a rail system. It's a magnetic rail system, but that forklift can't venture off of the path. It has to stay on the track. Guess what? If your employee's here and the track's over there, we're not going to have any struck by injuries, right? It's prevention through design. They eliminated that hazard before it even became one. So if you're adding something on, or you're changing something, or you're improving something, what hazards do we have, and what can we do to eliminate them while we're building this, while we're changing this? It is the most desired form of control as well. It removes that hazard, and that's really what we're going after. ISO 45001. Anybody familiar with that one? I got one head nod. So ISO is the International Standards Organization. Anybody else ISO certified through it with anything else? 9,000 or? Okay. So ISO is a international accrediting body that they have different stuff. So they have one for quality, they have one for environmental, they have, I forget what the other one is. Now they've come out with a safety standard. It's ISO 45001. It is the world's first international occupational health and safety standard. It requires continuous auditing. How many of you in here are safety people and HR people? Okay. So then you get that thrust on you too. You get to do the continuous auditing. But by doing this, and if we have the third-party verification, number one, you get an international accreditation if we can comply with all the ISO stuff. The other cool thing is that when OSHA walks in, you got your cool little plaque up there that says ISO 45001 certified. OSHA's going to go, huh, okay, well, at least they're making an effort. It kind of soothes their hackles, and they're not going to dig as deep, right? So having that ISO certification, there's a lot of employers that are trying to go after it now and get it because it gives them that accreditation. It gives them a little bit of alleviation from OSHA. There's a lot that goes into it, but there's a lot of benefit that comes out of it. And there's an old one, which is the International Labor and Organization Standard. That one was from 2001. We're talking 19 years ago. But that one is what this one was based in. So they updated it, they upgraded it, and they said, hey, we can use this as a boilerplate. And the last one's technology. That is another best practice in the safety world. How many of you use computer-based training for your safety training? People sit behind a desk, watch a video, watch a PowerPoint, click through some stuff. Okay? That's all well and good, but you know what happens, right? They doze off, and the voice says, "Do you want to continue?" And they're like, "Oh, yeah." They click it, and doze off again. Okay? Told you in my previous life I did fire brick work. One of the things that we would have to do is we'd have to go to these safety councils. So the Houston Area Safety Council, Bay Area, whoever it was, and I'd have to sit through their day of training. It was all the same. I'd have to sit through confined space rescue, forklift, scaffold, hot work, the plant safety orientation, and then sometimes we have to go through radiation training. It's usually about 10 hours of sitting at a computer screen, staring at it, looking next. You want to continue? Oh, yeah. 10 hours. And then when I was done, I had to take a little quiz. Well, the quiz is common sense, and if you've ever set foot on a job site, you can answer all of it. So I take the quiz, and then I go walk on the job. Okay? Did that really benefit me? Did I get any training off of that or any beneficial knowledge? No. So I bring this up because while computer-based training is great for certain stuff, it shouldn't always be your go-to. There's something to be said for face-to-face, in-person training where you have a discussion with employees. Sometimes we just can't. And sometimes it's easier for us to use an app or a streaming service to have them watch a quick little safety video and sign off that they watched it. That's a great tool, especially if you have a spread out workforce. Some of my trucking firms, it's hard for them to get everybody together in one room at one time. Well, if they use that and they can send out a little video, everybody documents they watch it, hey, that works. But that's not the thing that you should fall on. It's not the thing that you should hang your hat on and say, hey, we're going to do all of our training this way. Because employees aren't going to get anything out of it. So computer-based training is great, but it's great as an addition to your training. It shouldn't take place of. Another best practice thing is safety auditing apps. I go to the Safety Engineers Conference every year throughout the country, wherever it is, and they always have technology companies there. They're like, oh, what are you doing? I'm like, oh, I'm lost control. Oh man, we got this great thing. It's an auditing app. You can walk through and document the different stuff that you see. And I'm like, yeah, we've already got that. But for certain employers, it's a great tool because how many of you in here actually have a degree in safety or were formally trained in occupational safety and health? Okay. So for you three, you probably know what you're doing when you do a safety audit or a safety walk, right? For the rest of you who got it thrown on you like I did, you don't know where to start. You don't know the stuff that you're supposed to be looking for. Those apps can help with that. A little bit of training can help with that too, but those apps can help because you take a picture and then it'll ask you, okay, well, what's the standard? What's the violation here? And so it helps educate you as well. But I was thrown into safety. I was a superintendent for my company, and they said, hey, we need a safety director. And I said, why me? They said, well, you're our youngest superintendent. You won't say no. Well, what if I do? We'll give you $2 extra an hour. Okay, sure. So then I became the safety director for our company. I knew nothing. They just needed somebody with that title. Well, then they decided, hey, we better send him for some extra training, and that's what really started me in safety. But for the most part, most people that I talk to that are in the HR safety role, they weren't formally trained in occupational safety and health. There's not too many people that go, I want to be a safety guy when I grow up. It's just not a cool career path, right? It's not a firefighter. It's not a police officer. It's a safety guy. So you guys need all the help you can get, especially when it comes to compliance stuff, because you don't know all the ins and outs of it. And we want to prevent injuries and illnesses, but we also want to prevent stupid OSHA citations, right? How many of you have had an OSHA citation? What was it for, if you don't mind me asking? Okay. So they got a $1,000 citation from OSHA for not having the proper gloves when the maintenance employee was installing breakers. I bet you didn't know that was a thing, did you? Exactly. OSHA standard books, the general industry standard book, about that thick, super, super fine writing, okay? There's a lot of stuff in there. You're not going to have it all memorized. I don't even have it all memorized, and that's my job. So you guys need the help to be able to do this, to be able to make sure that you're in compliance. So as an HR or safety person, or the HR and safety person, you can use an app, and it'll help you with that. So safety programs are not a one and done. It's not something that you guys can put together today and not have to worry about for the next 10 years. It doesn't work that way. It's also not a safety paragraph. Now, it doesn't mean that you have to write the Holy Bible of safety for your employee handbook, but you need to make sure that you have addressed every hazard that's in your workplace. So we have to actually walk out into the operating area, onto the job site, walk out and talk to the drivers. What hazards do you face? What hazards have we addressed? What issues do you see out there that we haven't addressed? You have to have that conversation with them. And it needs to be a regular thing. Because if you don't do it regularly, then you're leaving yourself open for an injury you didn't even know you had an exposure to. The other thing that you have to do is you have to make sure that you're in compliance with all the various standards out there. The gloves. OSHA has an electrical standard. If you have a maintenance plan, you probably need to peruse the electrical standard. Make sure that you're addressing everything. If you have a fall hazard, you need to make sure that you have a fall protection plan. OSHA updated their walking and working surfaces standard. Last year, I believe it was. Hey, guess what? Not a lot of people knew about that. OSHA is great at coming out with stuff to keep people safe. They're terrible at advertising it. Terrible. Think about it. When they did the Affordable Care Act several years ago, it was all over the nightly news. Every night you'd hear something about it, right? They were great at advertising it. OSHA came out with a silica standard that affected 40% of the workforce, and nobody knew a thing about it. They came out with a safety data sheet. They changed the HAZCOM standard. Nobody knew anything about it. They're terrible at advertising. So you need to make sure that you're making yourself aware of all the standards that are out there, but also all the hazards you have in your workplace. And when you do that claim review, when you do have that injury, because let's face it, nobody's immune to injury. You're going to have one eventually. When you do, you need to look at it and ask yourself, what did we miss? What do we need to improve on? Not whose fault it was, not what did he do wrong, because that's what we get a lot of. Well, he did this, he did that. No. What was the situation surrounding what he did? Because that's where we're going to find the true issues. Do that claim review and remain objective about it, and when you do that, you're going to find that you're going to address a lot of unknowns. You're going to have a lot of things that you're going to go, well, I had no idea we had that. Really? Are you kidding me? Yeah. So make sure that you ask the questions. And don't ask, I'm not beating up the safety guys. I'm one of you. Don't ask the safety guy. Ask your employees. Because they're going to be the ones that are going to give you the truth. And don't ask the new employee either. Because the new employee is still going to want to butter you up, right? They want to get in good with the boss. Ask the guy who's been there for 10 years and doesn't care about his job anymore. He's going to be the most honest one. And he's going to be the one that's going to tell you exactly how the cow ate the cabbage. And when you do that, you're going to find that you're going to address a lot of the issues that you didn't know you had. And you're going to have a happier workforce. Because, hey, they actually do care about me. I don't think any single one of you drive into work and think, that's it, today's the day I'm cutting his finger off. Nobody thinks that, right? Well, maybe somebody does. But by the same token, no employee drives into work and says, I have had enough of this finger. Today's the day I'm losing it. Nobody does that. What happens is it's a combination of the choices that they make and the culture in which they exist. So the employee knows that you're behind, that we have to speed up, we have to up production because we got to get this stuff done, okay? And the culture in which they exist says it's okay to take shortcuts for production. Those two are a toxic combination, because that's when that employee goes to reach into that piece of equipment to grab something out when he shouldn't, and that's when he loses that finger. So it's a combination of all that stuff. What we have to do as management, HR, safety people, employers, supervisors, people who ride herd over these employees, is we have to make sure that we address it with our employees, and they know that under no uncertain circumstances are they allowed to cut corners and put themselves in harm's way for production. That needs to be part of your training. It needs to be first, middle, and last parts of your training with your employees, so that they understand, and you develop a culture in your workforce that says, hey, they really do care about me, and they really don't want to see me get hurt. So, do I have any questions? Does anybody have anything specific that they're like, hey, do I need this for my safety and health program? No? Okay. Oh, I'm sorry.
Let me get the mic so we can hear your awesome question.
You talk about being able to provide documentation for your safety program and your training, but what if you're a small organization and you have not had a violation, so you can't prove that you've enforced?
Having that safety and health program and having a disciplinary procedure in there, hey, we just haven't had anybody that hasn't followed that rule. So as long as you have that disciplinary procedure in there and it's written, you're fine. As long as you can prove that, hey, we just don't have anybody that breaks that rule. Over here. Run, Heather, run.
Sorry, I'm in heels.
How important do you think it is for an HR or safety person to have some kind of OSHA course?
It's critical. Yeah, it's critical for them to at least have a little bit of knowledge. Because let's face it, how many of you have had an OSHA 10 hour? Yeah. So an OSHA 10 hour is an introductory course. It's a day-and-a-half course to OSHA standards. I think it's critical that every person who's responsible for safety and health in this room at least sit through a 10 hour. Because then it at least opens up doors and opens up questions for you to go, oh, I need to research this more. I need to research that more. If you don't sit through that training and you don't actually, again, you don't know what you don't know, right? So sitting through that training and getting just a little bit will create that thirst for knowledge, and you'll dig a little bit deeper. I'm not saying sit through a 30 hour. That's a whole week. I don't even like teaching those. But at least a 10 hour. Or if you see that there's a webinar on safety and health, sit through it. The American Society of Safety Professionals puts them out on a regular basis, and they're usually about an hour. It's like a lunch and learn thing, you know. But it's a webinar that'll go over things safety related. Usually they cost $100. It's a great course just to sit through to get that introductory knowledge. But yes, I think it's critical that you at least scratch the surface of safety and health if you're responsible for it. For an HR person, especially if you're dealing with work comp injuries and that sort of stuff, the claims adjuster is going to have a lot of questions. Loss control is going to have a lot of questions. A lot of times I get the blank stare from the HR manager. Well, did they follow that policy or not? Were they trained? Oh, no. So make sure that you have a little bit of knowledge. And then, like I said, it'll create a rabbit hole for you to start chasing down to find the different answers to your questions. So, anyone else have any questions? Okay. Well, with that, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Sam.